Welcome all to the Festival of the News! I'm your master of Sarah Newsies, here to celebrate a whopping 117 episodes of joy and laughter and some other emotions that we don't need to talk about right now. That's right, folks, we're doing a fun episode! Big special, maybe some guests, a smorgasbord of all the news happening in the world, but fun! Variety! Keeping it light. Let us now dive into Cody K. Johnston's spectacularly newsgasmic rodeo of oily news content. Haha! Swashbuckling, explosions, romance, perhaps even a murder mystery? Let us ride the wave of destiny to the islands of discovery. Here is some news!
Panic and pandemonium at Kabul airport today as desperate people pour onto the runway trying to flee the country in what can only be described as a chaotic exodus. Now, people are literally clinging on to US military aircrafts as they try to take off. The US is in charge of the airport there.
Right. Sorry. I forgot the, You f***ing blew it, Cody! You asshole! Sorry, folks. I should have, looked at the actual news first. And, maybe there's some other good news down the line, and we'll get to that. But first, let's talk about what's happening in Afghanistan. And then we'll move on to oh, Jesus Christ. Oh, God. The spectacular newsgasmic rodeo of oily new. Can we just get like a bumper to get me out of this, please?
Oh, groovy, baby.
I'm so sorry, everyone. Okay, so, Afghanistan. Where to begin? Billions of years ago, after dust from an exploded okay, let's not. Alright, so Earth forms, there's the moon. Okay, Jesus Christ, the plague. All right. Okay, so, in December of 1979, oh my god, this is gonna be a really long bummer. Okay, actually, let's go back to February of 1979, when the United States CIA began funding Afghan rebels and turning the country toward the West, sparking the Soviet Union to invade Afghanistan for 10 years, well into the 80s, before pulling out and subsequently collapsing. God, this episode sucks already. Then, after the Soviet Union dissolved, the US also pulled out their funding, and the country of Afghanistan plunged into a civil war. And not the cool kind where you f*** up an airport either. They probably did that too, but not with giant Paul Rudds, is my point. Anyway, during all of this, some of the formerly US-funded Mujahideen fighters and others went on to form the Taliban in 1994. And the not cool civil war lasted about 2 years and then resulted in the Taliban having control of the country from 1996 onward. And while there are other newsworthy events after that and before and during, I'm just gonna skip ahead to 2000-ish, maybe 2001, specifically September of 2001, when a group of mostly Saudi Arabian terrorists with ties to Al-Qaeda, a group that isn't the Taliban but also has close ties to the Taliban, carried out an attack on America that, really upset a lot of people for a lot of reasons. Like how they had to delay the release of Training Day because of it. Great film. Ethan Hawke, man. Seems like a pretty good guy. I mean, nobody's perfect, right? He had that cheating thing. Not good. Anyway, 9/11. We're talking about 9/11 and how not a month after that, we began Operation Enduring Freedom, also known as Operation Bomb the Living Shit out of Afghanistan before occupying the country for 20 years.
The United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
Ah, yeah, there he is. Remember him? And listen, there's a lot here. About the war, and Bush, Osama bin Laden, Iraq, Saddam, and how it seems like a lot of what we did there had nothing to do with 9/11 or terrorism or freedom, and the Taliban actually offered to turn in Osama bin Laden after 9/11, and we refused, and we'll circle back to all that. But you sort of remember, and if not, we'll certainly jog your memory, and maybe you weren't even born or sentient for that, and you're like one of those freaks who's somehow under 20? Do those even exist? I've only read about them. But for now, let's move ahead to what happened with the Taliban, who after enduring freedom, sort of scattered and then regrouped around 2003. We then spend a whole lot of years, lives, and money continuing to fight them in Afghanistan because of freedom and other junk. And whenever it seemed like we could leave, we just didn't. And instead, the war just got bigger. Then a new person became president and said this.
Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.
Remember that guy dying? Motherfucker wasn't even in Afghanistan. Also, back in 2001, the Taliban literally offered to give him to us after 9/11, and Bush refused for reasons. That's weird, but hey, we did it! I guess. And that's about when, for like the 5th time, an American president seemed to be indicating that the war was finally winding down, and that we were going to pull our troops out of Afghanistan. The event was, after all, the thing we were originally there to do, you know? Get bin Laden! And then we did it! Not pull out of Afghanistan, mind you. We actually, we didn't do that. And then we continued to not do that for like 10 more years. And then Ethan Hawke starred in that Purge movie. And then a new guy became president. And the subsequent Purge films got like depressingly relevant because this new president guy, man, he was pretty terrible. And we certainly won't get into all of that, except to say that this new terrible president, like all the presidents before him, inherited a real pickle of a war and had a lot of ideas about ending that war. But at first was like, oh, let's do more war because he was pretty stupid. But then later was like, okay, maybe let's do less war because we were hitting 20 years and everyone was like, hey, why are we still doing this war? And also we were like, hey, where did all these Nazis come from? And also, oh wow, we're all dying because of a virus. And also, the sun sure feels hotter. And also, we were like, holy shit, did they just try to do a stupid coup? And so we were juggling a lot of stuff, is my point. Also, First Reformed had come out and was sweeping a nation, you know? Remember when we couldn't stop talking about First Reformed? Starring Ethan Hawke? He's great. But buried within all of that other stuff, there was yet another official promise to pull out of Afghanistan. And it seemed pretty clear that getting troops out of Afghanistan was complicated and probably disastrous. Like, even the really dumb treason president seemed to understand that. And we'll certainly get into why pulling out would destabilize the country. But the point is that we were super gonna do it this time. We set a date and everything. But then that treason stuff happened where the dumb president got elected out of office and we got a slightly better president, but still not like, you know. And while Joe Biden initially did delay Trump's promise that was sort of also Obama's promise that was sort of also Bush's promise to leave Afghanistan, he actually did do that thing. After 20 years, Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. Classy stuff show, great job. And on July 2nd, 2021, US troops left Bagram Airfield, the hub of the war, and handed it over to Afghan security forces. And by handed it over, I actually mean left without telling anyone. And aside from the 650 US troops specifically stationed to protect the US embassy in Kabul, we were more or less officially out of the country. Meanwhile, since May, the Taliban had launched an offensive and began reclaiming areas. And after killing or wounding nearly 2,400 Afghan civilians, by the end of July, they had about half of the country. By mid-August, they had taken over Bagram Airfield, and via very familiar imagery, the US evacuated its embassy as the Taliban took full control over the country. So, there you have it. I know that was a very long and unnecessary recap of the last 20 plus years. It might have been tough for you to sit there and have all that time wasted, only to end up back where we started with nothing gained. You know, really annoying stuff, to have wasted a lot of time and effort and money and lives that could have been spent on other things. You know, about $2 trillion, 20 years, and oh right, the lives of 2,448 US troops, 3,846 contractors, 72 journalists, 51,191 Taliban fighters, 444 aid workers, 1,144 allied service members, 66,000 Afghan military members, and f***ing 47,245 civilians. Great jobs all around, no notes. Way to squander an incalculable amount of human existence on something so flimsy that it fell apart faster than this joke setup. See, because we love to frame it as 20 years of effort gone in just a few weeks, but that's not really what happened, is it? If something falls apart in a few weeks after 20 years, it means we didn't spend those 20 years actually building something stable. We failed continuously and for 2 decades. And now the world is, or at least should be, laughing at us. Absolutely pathetic, America. And to blame one person for that just isn't gonna cut it. I mean, sure, some people share more blame than others, but we'll get to all of the blame some other time. Right now, we need to move on, get into other oily news content. It's time for Afghanistan. Who do we blame? Oh, okay, I guess we're gonna do that right now, after all. Okay, shit. Jesus, shit. Jesus' shit and piss. Who do we blame for everything that happened in Afghanistan? Well, naturally, when figuring that out, we'll turn to the one group that definitely shares no blame and can freely criticize U.S. policy, the GOP.
What we have seen is an incredibly poorly executed exit from the theater, and it is endangering the lives. Thousands of Americans remain in Afghanistan. It appears the administration had no reasonable plan to safely allow those Americans to leave. Thousands of Afghans aided and assisted our military presence for decades, and it appears that the administration had little to no plan to help those Afghans exit the country as well. And this is a military failure, a failure in planning, a failure in execution that falls squarely on the president. And sadly, at least so far, it seems the president is trying to blame everyone except himself and his own administration.
Thanks, Ted. Enjoy getting ratioed by lame-ass CNN, you weird, lying weirdo. Congratulations on using this historic moment to harass a woman online. Weirdo freak liar. Weirdo Ted is now calling for an investigation into everything that's happened this month. And while that's probably more because of the right's deep sexual lust to have their own gotcha impeachment like the other team did, twice with that terrible president that they didn't even like, he's also, I guess, not wrong about needing an investigation. But also, not the type of investigation he probably plans on having, where they lay a 20-year war started by George Bush and a 2002 Congress on Joe Biden. But also, Joe Biden was one of those people in 2002 who voted for this 20-year war, and also he absolutely could have worked toward a smoother transition. But also, so could have Trump, or Obama for that matter. And we're going to talk about that at some point. But what's key here is that, despite the need for actual accountability and an investigation into exactly what went wrong, and the bigger conversation we're about to have and all of that, what we shouldn't do is tolerate the chorus of conservative ghouls taking their weird victory lap because Biden f***ed up the withdrawal. A thing that the majority of Americans wanted. A thing that a lot of these same freaks were gunning for when their guy was the president. And by their guy, I mean sometimes literally their father. Hey, yeah, thanks Donald Trump Jr. I can't wait to hear your analysis of a war that started back when you were getting your ass kicked at comedy clubs for laughing too hard at racist jokes. A real thing that happened. Also, that same year, he talked about how he liked remaining anonymous and staying in the background. Any update on that?
Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Just watching my algorithms get crushed. I guess I did something to piss off the Instagram gods, so hopefully you're seeing this stuff anyway. We'll do what we can. Talk to you soon.
Donnie Jr. can't shut the up about how much of a mistake it was to pull out of Afghanistan. He loves it almost as much as he loves openly agreeing with the Taliban on issues. This is despite him literally helping his dad campaign on the promise of pulling out troops all the way back in 2020. We could spend the entire episode just listing these obvious liars and grifters acting like they weren't rock hard for pulling troops just a few months ago. The GOP quietly removing any mention of Afghanistan from Trump's presidential accomplishments, etc. Or how these people pretending to be concerned about the safety of the Afghan people and allies are the exact same ones who absolutely can't stand immigration and, in fact, callously voted against speeding up the visa process for Afghan allies we are now leaving behind. Like, here's Barry Moore of Alabama, one of the people who voted against those visas, retweeting a statement by Kevin McCarthy saying, President Biden recklessly pulled out of Afghanistan without a plan, leaving thousands of Americans and those we've made promises to behind, without a single delicious slice of self-awareness. These transparent, hypocritical wieners and whiners. For the love of all that is good, let us collectively ignore them. They don't matter. Like, does anyone really need to see what fucking Gutfeld has to say about this? Kind of? Yeah, kind of. I get that.
So when asked about this contradiction in treatment, Twitter said their top priority is keeping people safe. Of course, unless it's Afghan women and people who think like Trump. If those words were any more empty, they'd be Hunter Biden's medicine cabinet. And as for keeping us safe, you could have fooled me, Twitter. The last thing someone sees before Chrissy Teigen ruins their lives are their names trending on your vacuous vomit engine. If you still think that these social media titans have your best interests at heart, you probably think Ben & Jerry's is in your heart's best interest, too. At least the Taliban doesn't pretend to be neutral.
Oh my God, he's so beautiful. I want to sculpt him with my cum. Dave, you are fired. Gutfeld actually used the Afghanistan news to do like 4 minutes about Twitter censorship grievances. Like, seriously. As the opener of his first show after news broke about the Taliban, he thought, obviously, everyone's gonna be talking about Twitter cancel culture. Then the Hunter Biden medicine cabinet thing, like, does he mean that he doesn't have medicine in the cabinet, like he doesn't do drugs? Or is it that he's taking all of the drugs, but like, why would he keep them in the... Okay, you know what? We can't just talk about this beautiful idiot, Greg, at least the Taliban, Gutfeld. And enough about fake blame aimed at Joe Biden. Let's get to the real blame, starting with Joe Biden, a person who is definitely to blame for at least some of this. Like, yes, there's his history with voting for the war and Senate record we could pick apart, but I'd rather focus on the broad idea that Biden was simply continuing something Trump began, as explained by this footage of a very sleepy coat rack.
I inherited a deal that President Trump negotiated with the Taliban. Under his agreement, U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021, just a little over 3 months after I took office. U.S. forces had already drawn down during the Trump administration from roughly 15,500 American forces to 2,500 troops in country. And the Taliban was at its strongest militarily since 2001. The choice I had to make as your president was either to follow through on that agreement or be prepared to go back to fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season. There would have been no ceasefire after May 1.
So firstly, the coat rack is not wrong, in the sense that it was important to get the heck out of Afghanistan. And while that's not an easy task, there's this narrative going that there simply was no other way to leave the country without causing the level of chaos we saw. As if we had our finger in a dam, and pulling it out was the only option. But that's not entirely the case, is it? And you can see that not just by looking at how quickly the Taliban took control after we left, but the fact that they did it without much resistance at all. So why was that? Well, you're going to see a lot of people trying to say that the Afghan army were a bunch of dildo brains who, despite our great American training, simply fucked the dog on a combat level. Except the problem wasn't ineptitude so much as widespread corruption in the highest rankings of their military. Food and ammunition supplies meant for the front lines were mysteriously vanishing, money being embezzled and troop numbers faked, soldiers not getting paid and quickly losing trust in the Afghan government. Instead of addressing this, the U.S. largely just ignored it, while supplementing the problem with thousands of private contractors. Contractors who, back in June, began to leave the country. Oh good, glad they're safe. Meanwhile, the Taliban began pushing forward and by June had captured 81 of the 420 district centers. By July, that number rose to 127 and then beyond, showing a clear and obvious speed to their takeover. During this time, a report came out by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, a watchdog group specifically looking at spending in the country that said, and I'm quoting, "The ANDSF, as in Afghan National Security Forces, has retaken some districts and the Afghan government still controls all 34 provincial capitals, including Kabul. But from public reporting, the ANDSF appeared surprised and unready, and is now on its back foot." It also expressed, quote, serious concerns about the corrosive effects of corruption within the ANDSF, and went on to call out a pervasiveness of over-optimism and a tendency to elevate anecdotes of good news over data showing a lack of progress. This report came out in July, the same month that Biden assured us that the pullout would go smoothly. The same month we knew that many Afghan interpreters were still struggling to get visas to leave the country. Several months after, that same Afghanistan Reconstruction Watchdog group flat out said that the aid cuts we were seeing would likely cause the Afghanistan government to collapse and return to the same Taliban control in the 1990s. This is a report from March, folks, a group we tasked specifically for assessing this stuff, saying that unless we give more aid, the Afghan government would collapse in our absence. But to be fair, how would we pay for it? Then, in August, we pulled out troops from Afghanistan. And then, as predicted, the Afghan army that was literally living off of boxes of old potatoes began to lay down their arms as the Taliban rolled in. Because of course they did. They were literally beginning to starve and had no reason to fight. The idea that they just rolled over to the Taliban ignores not only all the Afghan soldiers who gave their lives fighting, but just how neglected they were in these final months. And then we get defense officials going on television and saying shit like this.
There was nothing that I or anyone else saw that indicated a collapse of this army and this government in 11 days.
So yes, we can absolutely blame Biden and our military for not taking the proper steps to ensure that shit wouldn't go so bad so fast, or rather, knowing and not caring, because the first part of that clip I just showed is this.
I have previously said from this podium and in sworn testimony before Congress that the intelligence clearly indicated multiple scenarios were possible. One of those was an outright Taliban takeover following a rapid collapse of the Afghan security forces and the government. Another was a civil war, and a third was a negotiated settlement. However, the time frame of a rapid collapse, that was widely estimated and ranged from weeks to months and even years.
Oh, okay. So you knew this was going to happen. You just didn't think it would happen so fast. Thanks for clearing that up, you highly decorated turd. But hey, at least it gets even worse. You see, that group I keep mentioning, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, they make a lot of cameos in news articles from the last decade. And this is because they've been giving quarterly reports to Congress specifically about our progress in Afghanistan since around 2012. And in short, those reports have been filled with elaborate tales of failure and waste. A $280 million project to help 75,000 Afghan women get jobs, resulting in the promotion of 55 women total. This was from 2018. The same year, they put out a report saying that the $3 billion we had put into a trust for the reconstruction of Afghanistan had no oversight and was at high risk of misuse. Here's a report from 2013 saying the same thing about public health programs in Afghanistan. Here's a letter from 2014 detailing substandard construction techniques being used by contractors, resulting in a serious fire hazard. A $34 million facility that was built and then never occupied. Like, they built it, and then it just sat there, empty. Here's a fucking Ponzi scheme they uncovered. And they were doing this right up until now. Here they are in 2020, warning about hundreds of millions of dollars in missing weapons. But hey, good news, we found them, and by we, I mean the Taliban. The point here is, holy fucking shit. For the last decade, we have been thoroughly documenting a timeline of absolute failure in our efforts to rebuild this nation. And Congress and the presidents have had total access to this documentation. And we just kept going without making any adjustments, despite, and I really can't stress this enough, knowing that we were failing. And then we just left. So yeah, there's just so much blame to go around that it feels like the entire government should get confronted like the villain in a political thriller. Just like thousands of suited congresspeople all cornered and disgraced like Alan Alda in Murder at 1600. Spoilers for Murder at 1600. But also, this fucking chump used his presidency to drastically cut visas for Afghan interpreters because he doesn't like the brown folk. So yeah, some people are worse than others, I guess. Oh gosh, I do wonder what he has to say about all this.
I thought it would maybe run through bureaucracy. It doesn't. You need somebody up there that they're going to respect. So when they say, oh, he talked to the Taliban, you remember they were criticizing me. They criticized me when I talked to Kim Jong-un. Well, President Biden told me it's the single biggest problem we have. I said, have you ever called him? Have you ever talked to him? No, I haven't. He did try, but it was not receptive on the other side. but it was receptive with me. Now, we were supposed to have a war and probably a very big nuclear war. I get along with him great, and I got along with him great. He doesn't like Biden much, I'll tell you that, but I got along with him great.
Oh, okay, so gibberish. Makes sense that it would be a weird string of gibberish. Anything else, former Mr. Loser president?
I've heard as many as 40,000 Americans, and the Taliban, good fighters, I will tell you, they're good fighters. We have to give them credit for that. They've been fighting for 1,000 years. That's what they do, is they fight.
Don't we miss him? Bye. So yeah, Biden's certainly done f***ed up, and boy, I don't like the guy, but I suppose at least he's not this wrong, weird fucking freak who thinks the Taliban has been around for 1,000 years. I guess this is the bar we've set for ourselves, but just because the last guy was cartoonishly bad, and definitely would have handled this way worse, we can't act like Biden doesn't also share blame with Trump, or Obama, or... I feel like there's someone else who was involved in all of this. Like some kind of, like a president who also could be blamed for what's happening, and... I'm sure it'll come to me. Probably right after the episode is done, am I right? I'll be like, Cody, you done it again! Anyway, Afghanistan segment over. We said all that needs to be done and said, and so let's move on. But first, enjoy these commercial messages. It's just one message. Oh, wow. I sure am tired from all the news. That's why some days I just want to kick back and watch videos of raccoons in little outfits on the internet. Sometimes I donate to the raccoons so they can buy fancier outfits, which requires sharing my personal information. The point here is that the internet is weird, man, but we love it. And we very often share much of our personal information over it. We cast it out, our precious deets, the way one would carelessly toss a postcard into a mail slot. And yet we rarely think about the many grubby hands that touch our poor, defenseless deets. Well, worry no longer, my little watchers, because ExpressVPN is here to provide you with a much-needed protection from all the grub-fingered cretins looking to steal your information. It's the envelope over the postcard, or rather, the little raincoat on the raccoon. Or, more specifically, it's a virtual private network you can use to protect the connection between your device and the World Wide Web. You see, we've actually teamed up with the folks at ExpressVPN, and so if you go to expressvpn.com/somenews, you can find out how to get 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. We're confident that after trying out ExpressVPN's premium high-speed servers and 24/7 customer support, you'll be hooked like a fish on the end of a fishing pole held by a little raccoon in a fisherman's outfit. Their app is easy to use, very secure, and in fact, they have been rated the #1 VPN provider by TechRadar, CNET, and The Verge. Listen, I don't know if you know this, but browsing on incognito mode isn't exactly incognito. Oh no. Oh no. Later. ISPs can legally sell your data, not to mention all the other corporations mining your data without your knowledge. Also, the man. Don't forget the man! And so ExpressVPN can actually put a stop to that by encrypting all of your data and rerouting it through their secure servers. You get your data encryption, your IP masking, stuff you really do need when connected to an open network at a coffee shop or a hotel, places where even the most beginner of hackers can access your information with just a little computer knowledge. It's good to protect your deets. You love your deets, but your deets aren't for everyone. Your deets shouldn't be some open dumpster that people can just rummage through like some kind of like a trash-loving giraffe. So go to expressvpn.com/somenews and see about protecting your deets for 3 months free. Cody K. Johnston's spectacular newsgasmic rodeo of oily news content returns now! God, I wish we didn't have that graphic anymore. Anyway, welcome back to the special. We just finished talking about Afghanistan and are ready to move on. No more of that. So let's spin the magical wheel of news and see what comes up. Oh... Looks like the wheel has spoken. What fucking fun. But hey, good news. It just so happens that I finally remembered the other guy we can blame for all of this. Lorne Michaels.
Gee golly wow, boy, we got him now. Kandahar, Kandahar. Say Taliban, move your minivans. Kandahar, Kandahar.
That's happy
Holy shit, early 2000s SNL. For reference, Kandahar is one of the main cities we bombed during Operation Enduring Freedom, no doubt killing a lot of people. And yes, I'm going to talk about George W. Bush, the guy who did this stuff, but I wanted to give some of our younger viewers an insight into why he was allowed so easily to do all this stuff in the first place. Because all of us, or at least most of us, were in a very unique and toxic headspace. Something terrible had happened to a lot of American citizens in 2001, and that terrible thing briefly united the country, but also shaped a generation of cynicism and fear for a lot of young people. And for the older people, well, they just lost their fucking minds. It really screwed us up to the point that some of the most independently minded comedic or liberal voices were shouting, "Love it or leave it" sentiments, lest they be booed off the stage, literally.
We live in a time where we have a man sending us to war for fictitious reasons, whether it's the fictition of duct tape or the fictitious of orange alerts. We are against this war, Mr. Bush. Shame on you, Mr. Bush. Shame on you. And anytime you've got the Pope and the Dixie Chicks against you, your time is up. Thank you very much.
Say what you will about Michael Moore. And now that you've done that, I gotta say, boy, it sure was surreal to see a war-hungry Hollywood. They re-edited the Bourne Identity to make the CIA, the villain of the film, seem more good. That's how fucked up we were from 9/11. And to be clear, I'm not saying that we were all to blame. Fuck anyone who says that. Sorry about before, Lauren. Let's do lunch. Let's fuck lunch together. I just wanted to paint a picture of how incredibly out of sorts we were, how overwhelmed with anger and fear. It's why when Osama bin Laden was finally killed, this happened. This was across the country, and while in retrospect it seems weird that a group of people who were barely teenage when 9/11 happened would uproariously celebrate a man getting shot in the face after so many other deaths, it makes a lot of sense when you realize that the September 11th attacks were likely what shaped their adult view of the world. They had, for as long as they could remember, been told that there was a specific monster out there that was now dead. During a time where we were all deeply afraid and paranoid, of course we were sold something literally called a war on terror. The media bought it, Hollywood and TV bought it, and so with a 90% approval rating, having refused an offer by the Taliban to turn in Osama bin Laden, have I mentioned that yet? Because he did that, George W. Bush and a unanimous fucking Senate led us into a 20-year war. Not to mention a nearly unanimous House of Representatives, with the only single nay vote going to Representative Barbara Lee, who, and this is real life, received thousands upon thousands of death threats for doing so, plus multiple op-eds calling her a traitor.
Our country is in a state of mourning. Some of us must say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause just for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today so that this does not spiral out of control.
Hey, look at the totally correct person. Let's get her. So yeah, everyone wanted a lick of that sweet stick of war. They wanted it all over their faces and in their mouths. We could put the war wherever we wanted because they wanted it so hard. And an argument can be made that really any president at this point would have done the thing Bush did. Going to war, that is. It was a very popular move. What you can't say any president would do, however, is all the stuff that came after this moment. And perhaps the reason that 90% approval rating took a steady 7-year decline.
These alternative methods you talked about in terms of extracting information from these suspected terrorists, were you made personally aware of all of the techniques that were used, for example, against the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and did you approve all of those techniques?
I told our people get information without torture and was assured by our Justice Department that we were not torturing.
Ah, good question from Matt Lauer. Jesus Christ, what a time the mid-2000s were. Specifically, that's from September of 2006. And thanks to a handful of leaked documents and books and all sorts of, evidence, since then, we finally have a pretty darn good idea of what went down behind the scenes. And that starting in 2002, Attorney General John Ashcroft verbally approved a series of enhanced interrogation techniques, such as slapping, cramped confinement, sleep deprivation, diapers, waterboarding, and use of insects. You know, torture. And the following month, the CIA considered filling in the president to the torture, to which the White House decided it would be better if Bush simply didn't know about the torture. And so for the next 4 fucking years, our president gave the CIA a blank check under the single stipulation that what they did was technically legal. The torture.
Why is waterboarding legal, in your opinion?
Because the lawyer said it was legal. He said it did not fall within the Anti-Torture Act.
It's so great to see both of these dudes back together. Obviously, we're just gonna scratch the surface when talking about the Bush-era war and all the torture, but the crux appeared to be a president that was willfully ignorant while a cluster of GOP ghouls did pretty much whatever they wanted under him. And while those ghouls were way more insidious in their actions, you know, your Cheneys, your dead Rumsfelds, the blood flows to Bush's hands. Bush who, and I don't know if you know this, rejected an offer from the Taliban to turn over Osama bin Laden.
There's no need to discuss innocence or guilt. We know he's guilty. Turn him over. If they want us to stop our military operations, they just got to meet my conditions. And when I said no negotiations, I meant no negotiations.
Yes! No negotiations. Just turn him over, but also we don't want him if you negotiate for it. And for context, the thing that the Taliban was asking for at the time was for us to stop bombing them. We were bombing them to get Osama bin Laden, but refused their offer to hand him over if we stopped bombing them. So yeah, maybe Bush should go to jail or something? I don't know. Seems weird that he just moved on from this without going to jail or something. Seems super weird that anyone over a certain age could act like this all falls on Biden or even Trump or Obama when this guy did so much deliberate damage while in charge. Like, really fucking disingenuous for the GOP to point all of their fingers at Joe Biden. Really messed up stuff. Also, maybe all presidents should be in jail. You get to be the president, but when you're done, prison. But the big question, at least for this episode, is why? Why did we continue to stay for so long after bin Laden was killed through 4 different presidents? And the answer is something called mission creep. It's a great descriptor for what Solid Snake does and is, and also describes when a country plunged into war begins to move the goalposts of what constitutes a victory. And it's what we've been doing for the last 20 years. It's something we've all been thinking about, but perfectly is summed up in a 2014 extensive study by the Office of the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction again, who interviewed over 600 officials involved in the war and found that no one was quite sure what we were doing. To quote one anonymous person, it was never fully clear in our minds what the established goals and timelines were. Man. Remember the Afghanistan papers that everyone ignored? Seems like we should have given those a bit of a scan. After all, this all started because of 9/11, getting Osama bin Laden, punching terror in the oomph, and etc. And then it was Laura Bush who spoke up about the Taliban's treatment of women and our need to help the people of Afghanistan. And she wasn't wrong, at least not about the Taliban and a need to help. And it really should be noted that many people in Afghanistan did have their lives improved by an intervention, and there's a solid argument for humanitarian involvement. And there's a solid counter-argument that it'll still involve exploitation and filling imperialist pockets. And also, what, we're just gonna stick our noses, make a list of all the places we gotta go, well, we do that, we gotta do that, we gotta do that. Also, here is a fresh WikiLeaks release about a CIA analysis from March 2010 that proposes using Afghan women to create a PR feminist campaign to aid in justifying their attacks on the Taliban and continuation of the war. Pretty gross, guys. I know you're watching this, and that's pretty gross of you. But regardless, what these and other similar sentiments mostly equated to at the time was extending the military effort into the general policing and exploding of Afghanistan. A vague war on terror with no specific purpose and therefore no ending. Policing f***ing opium for some reason, which ultimately never broadly helped the Afghan population, as evidenced by, right now. The people it did help the most, however, were anyone who wanted an extended and unwinnable war. People like James Woolsey, a former CIA boss and longtime presidential advisor, who on September 12th of 2001 began to accuse Iraq of being responsible for the World Trade Center attack. A day after the attacks. I don't know, maybe he just had a really good hunch, or maybe he was the director of the private equity firm Paladin Capital, which immediately began investing in companies creating products designed for anti-terrorism security. I don't know, who can say? And there's like hundreds of these guys, right? Thousands perhaps? And when one dies, two more show up. And this is where I note that in just the year 2020, the world spent $2 trillion in various military funding, $778 billion of which from the United States. It is a booming industry all over the world, which happens to be the place where the United States currently has roughly 800 bases in 70 different countries. Of course we stayed in Iraq and Afghanistan, because had we not, we would have just occupied a different place, done a war elsewhere. We can't not do the war. So let's stick with the endless war we already have, you know? It's called the military-industrial complex, and I don't know, Google it or whatever. And this relation between our military interests and the people making billions from it is one that self-perpetuates. Like, hey, remember military drones? That's a market predicted to make $26 billion by 2028. And boy, did Obama love drones. And drones loved Obama. It's a relationship you could describe as symbiotic, as if one person was scratching your back by helping you win a re-election by holding off layoffs in a swing state, and then in return, you also scratch theirs by authorizing international sales of your product, and then becoming the president to sell more weapons than any other before since World War II. Good for him! Obama's drone lust got so intense that by 2016, they filled more airspace over Afghanistan than conventional planes. Because you see, the beauty of drones is that the operators are safely elsewhere. There are no American casualties when you're bombing suspicious weddings for miles in the sky like a shitty Greek god, and so drones created yet another way to extend this war by limiting the number of Americans affected. Or as this one expert explains,
but when you don't have troops in the ground and you're not really gaining intelligence and you're not really there, you know that you're not there and you can't really win a war when you're not there. You can just create the possibility for a little Orwellian perpetual war. You know, what usually ends wars is body bags coming home or the cost gets too high. But with the drones, body bags don't come home and the costs are relatively cheap.
Thanks, buddy. Other things that make mission creep far easier: mercenaries. Much like drones, mercenaries enable the military to skew the number of boots on the ground so politicians can justify a continuing war. We can look at stuff like the time Blackwater Guards killed 17 civilians and think, well, that isn't us, despite the fact that we had already paid them over $1 billion in contracts at that point. We liked it better this way. We, being American politicians who could use contractors as a way to hide the actual cost of what we were doing. We also being Eric Prince. Oh, hey, Eric, what have you been up to these days?
It's the same collection of national security elites in Washington that have failed for that entire 20 years. They took what was a brilliant victory by special operations in the CIA in the first 6 months after 9/11 and turned it into a massive failed nation-building exercise. And it's largely been like a Star Trek cosplay convention where they just sit and talk to each other and delude themselves into thinking they're making progress. And it's been the same nonsense, and they refuse to think about any other ways to solve this problem.
Oh yeah, you stick it to those national security elites, billionaire defense contractor Eric Prince, on Swanson Air and CIA hopeful Tucker Carlson's show, because of course. Hey Eric, how's your sister Betsy DeVos? Cool of Trump to pardon your former employees who did that murder those years back. Is my soul bleeding? It feels like my entire soul is bleeding. I need to stuff a tampon all up in my soul. I could probably do a whole video on military contractors and Forever Wars and Ethan Hawke's drone movie and mission creep. But circling all the way back to Biden and the idea that there was no way to leave Afghanistan without causing widespread chaos, well, this is why that is being claimed. Because the United States has become so conditioned by our military occupation that we don't see anything between that and our total absence. We spent 20 entire years half-assing perpetuating an aimless war for the purposes of maintaining an economy of contractors and weapon manufacturers, and billions dissolved into well-documented nation-building failures, creating an unstable and bitter society while the Taliban quietly waited on the sidelines. Our efforts to actually improve the lives of their citizens were minimal. As this, you guessed it, cigar report outlines, our 20 years there only managed to boost literacy by 30% and bring down child mortality rates. And that's good, for sure. But as the report goes on to say, for the amount of money and time we put into it, it's pretty fucking grim. And at no point did the United States attempt to understand the Afghan culture or economy, because it was actually about our culture and economy, making nearly all of our nation-building projects unsustainable. And we knew this. And so maybe it was never about actually helping, and that's why, when we left, everything fell apart. Because just like we've always known that torture doesn't actually get results, we surely knew that we don't send in the military to make a country more stable. But we do both because the right people make money, and our culture simply loves to justify aggression over diplomacy. Good guys with guns, Liam Neeson getting his revenge, and so on. So the idea that there were no good options in Afghanistan is horse dick. A big horse's dick. There were good options. They would just involve completely rethinking what we were doing over there. They would mean admitting that we were wrong and insidious for 20 years and then restarting from scratch. We're not gonna do that because that would not only mean admitting we were wrong in Afghanistan, but wrong in so many other times we've involved ourselves in other countries. And boy, do we love involving ourselves in other countries. So who is to blame? Bush? Biden? Trump? Obama? Congress? America? Yes. It's actually a lot easier to identify who isn't to blame for what happened. So let's do that right now! Afghanistan, who isn't to blame? Number 1, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Number 2, Barbara Lee. And that's it. Afghanistan, who isn't to blame? Oh, and Ethan Hawke probably. Why couldn't this video be about Ethan Hawke? Okay, we're almost done, I swear. So maybe can we spin that news wheel one last time? But like, add some more variety. Finally! I want to cry. That's so f***ing great, you guys. Let's close this nightmare out with our very last news segment. Okay, we love Ethan Hawke, but there's still a lot to talk about with Afghanistan. You f***ing wheel! F*** you, God! Listen, Ethan Hawke is great. He's gonna be in the Knives Out sequel, you know? And he feels underrated, right? Like, he's been quietly doing great work for decades now. Often stuff that sneaks up on you. The Good Lord Bird? Come on, man! That's awesome stuff. Flawless man. No notes.
We have a president who likes drones.
Yeah. Well, it's incredibly useful for getting the troops out of Afghanistan.
That's a shame. So anyway, Afghanistan. It seems like there's not much more we need to say, except there is tons more to say, because I want to talk about what's about to happen. The inevitable response from the US and our destiny to not learn a single thing or take any responsibility for what we did. And it's already happening.
So we're getting it. And if history is any guide, and it's always a guide, we will see many refugees from Afghanistan resettle in our country in coming months, probably in your neighborhood. And over the next decade, that number may swell to the millions. So first we invade, and then we're invaded. It is always the same.
You know, Smudge Tarleton, you're right. It is always the same, isn't it? And so, after f***ing up Afghanistan, we're about to see an entire drawn-out and frustrating debate about whether or not we should accept their refugees into our country. Like a shitty friend who offers to fix your car, accidentally lights it on fire due to negligence and greed, and then refuses to give you a ride to work. A large portion of America is looking to take the extreme scumbag route, and it's extremely important that we don't let them. Because in all this talk about Bush and Biden and blame, it's easy to forget that this is all about real people. People whose lives we've been fucking with for far too long, who we can easily dismiss because we don't have to see them every day. We don't have to think about the suffering and pain and hardships, about how much these people have been fighting for their lives. We don't think about it because this war has been going on for so long that many of them and us were born into it. And it's good that we can end it. But the way we did it, not so much. And now a lot of people need our help. So here's a bunch of links on the screen that we'll put below the video. These are groups for helping the women of Afghanistan, the refugees, and journalists. Please take a look at them. Maybe add more links in the comments. Tell us our suggestions are shit if they're shit. And if you can, donate to them. I'm sure they'd like that very much. Call your local politicians and tell them that you support your state accepting Afghan refugees. Hold America accountable for cleaning up the ridiculous mess it caused. The evacuation is happening as we speak. As of recording this, the US has got 48,000 people out. Something they maybe should have done first, but I guess it's something. It's good we got those people out. It's good that news organizations are working to pull their people. It's fucking great that the Afghan girls robotics team got out. It's good that Airbnb is promising to house refugees, and we should probably keep checking up on them about that and make sure they do that. But yes, good things. Good to see people actually giving a shit. But for the sake of all that is fuck, we need to do everything we can to not get roped into another forever war, or even just war. Be it because of another terrorist attack, or fake humanitarian reasons, or some other bullshit reason. We need to learn a lesson from this that our leaders surely will not. And so when it comes time for another big patriotic vote, we need to let them know that we're sick and tired of this. And trust me, there will be another one. Possibly even in the same goddamn country as before.
Amid all the evacuations from Afghanistan, one country is holding off. China is urging its citizens to remain indoors in Afghanistan, but it is keeping its Kabul embassy open. Yesterday, the country's foreign ministry said China is ready for, quote, friendly and cooperative relations with the Taliban.
And so, as America moves on, the world talks about China going in. After all, the Taliban is now in charge of one of the world's largest deposits of lithium, a material we need to make electric cars go, amongst other things. It is, ironically, like oil to us. And once again, we're seeing a big American rival move into Afghanistan instead of us. And do you recall what we did the last time that happened? Anyone?
When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, we had this brilliant idea that we were going to come to Pakistan and create a force of mujahideen, equip them with Stinger missiles and everything else to go after the Soviets inside Afghanistan. And we were successful. The Soviets left Afghanistan, and then we said, great, goodbye, leaving these trained people who were fanatical in Afghanistan and Pakistan, leaving them well armed, creating a mess, frankly, that at the time we didn't really recognize. We were just so happy to see the Soviet Union fall, and we thought, okay, fine, we're okay now. Everything's going to be so much better.
Thanks, Hillary. Weird that it's you saying it, but yeah, you're not incorrect. It is disheartening, to say the least, to realize that we're literally in the same exact position we were back in the 70s. Because once again, we gotta beat the commies, right? We gotta get the thing that makes cars go. We gotta be on top. Even if it means completely destabilizing the Middle East, accidentally creating a new terrorist faction, and plunging ourselves into another 20-year war with no clear goal. Also, hey, remember all those drones? Did you think the drones pulled out of Afghanistan? Because they didn't. And in fact, as a response to this, the United States is stationing a bunch of MQ-9 Reaper drones in the Persian Gulf for both the Pentagon and the CIA to use for, you know, redacted. Boy, it's almost as if we ended the war only for us. It's almost like, along with destabilizing the area and giving the Taliban a bunch of weapons and control, we didn't even do the thing where we actually left Afghanistan and are already talking about the need to keep a close grip on the area. It's almost like we're locked into some inescapable time loop. You know, like the movie Predestination, starring Ethan Hawke, military drone enthusiast. God, I'm depressed. Sorry, everyone. This was supposed to be a fun one. Anyway, this has been Cody K. Johnston's spectacular newsgasmic rodeo of oily news content. Have a great 9/11 anniversary, folks. 20. The war in Afghanistan can almost drink legally, and they can already smoke legally. This is me smoking. Hey everybody, I'm a goofy character from the news show. Thanks for watching. It's been a great time, right? We had a great time today talking about all that good stuff. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and leave a comment. And we've got a patreon.com/somemorenews. We've got a podcast called Even More News. You can listen to that on the podcast places. And merch, if you like Warmbo merch, or this guy. I'm gonna come back and the cliffhanger. I'm the news Babadook, whatever. I don't fucking know. Thanks. Bye.